They had a street fight in high school. There's two stories that Persico killed this kid that they were fighting. I think he shot him. One kid got shot and one kid was stabbed. They were fighting over a girl, and there was two groups of kids, and they were tough kids, you know? It was the Garfield boys. I think the other gang was named the Tigers. And it's typical 1950s stuff, but they were tough. Scappy killed the guy, but Persico kept his mouth shut and told him, we'll succeed when we get out. Right? So there's two conflicting stories. One that Scappy actually did the murder as a kid, and the other one was that he took the blame. But whatever it was, when he got out of prison, he reunited with Persico, and they were part of a crew. And when Persico got in power, he made him a boss. He made him a skipper. And so Greg Scarpa and there's a few other guys reported directly to Scappy for a long time. Then years later, they made Greg Scarpa a boss. But Greg Scarpa was an interesting one because he had balls of steel, and he would kill you at the drop of a hat, no problem. He would kill you, beat you, kill you, not a problem. He didn't have a heart. If you owed him money, you better pay up. He had no blood in his veins, okay? But he was a gangster's gangster because he was having an affair with a girl that worked for the FBI, and she would give him information on other crews and other neighborhoods that's going on that are pitting against him, or people that they could put the feds on, lean on them instead of his crew. And then another part of his story is that I think it was 87, 86 or 87, not 100% sure. He gets diagnosed with AIDS. So what happened during a blood transfusion, what happened was he would like to drink every night, and he would take aspirin because he didn't want to get a headache. He would take aspirin every night, and he would drink. He had a social club called the Wimpy Boys Social Club. Of course, nobody was wimpy in that club, right? It's really funny. And he would drink almost every night. And taking all these aspirin, he got severe ulcers and stomach problems. And he went into the hospital, and they needed to give him a blood transfusion. And he didn't want to take any stranger's blood. So what he did was he had all the guys in his crew test to see if the blood matched his. So they had one guy that actually did. And they did the blood transfusion, but that guy was HIV positive, and he gave it to him. So now you have this guy who is HIV positive, right? And he's full-blown AIDS, okay? During the late 80s, this third war, and probably the final war of the Colombo crime family, starts brewing, right? Carmine Persico goes to prison for life. Like, he died in prison a few years back for life. The whole Langella, Jerry Lang, Scappy, they all get pinched and they all go to jail for a long time. They all died in jail. While Persico was in prison, there's a guy named Vic Arena. I think they call him Little Vic. He puts him as temporary boss, acting boss on the street. But all orders come from Persico from behind bars, right? Now, of course, Persico wanted his son, Alley Boy, to be boss, but he was also in prison, right? And Greg Scarpa Jr.'s son was in prison. So during this whole time, this war is starting to brew. So everybody knows the Gotti Castellano hit. Well, that wasn't a sanctioned hit, so there was a lot of people that were against him. So the Lucchese family and the Genovese family was completely against Gotti, and they tried killing him twice. They tried a car bomb, they tried shooting him, it didn't happen. Gotti had the Bonanno family aligned with him, but he had no other family aligned with him. And the Colombo family was always kind of like fighting with each other. Kind of always this chaos going on, right? So Gotti thinks that, okay, if I can get Vic Arena, if Vic Arena takes over this whole family and I can get the Colombos on my side and the Bonannos on my side, at least I have 3 out of the 5 families. So he's chirping in Vic's ear. He's chirping in Vic's ear. Gotti saying that, you could take over the crew and we could be a powerhouse. And if you need guys on the street, I'll put guys on the street for you, all this shit. So this is the 80s. And of course, Vic Arena decides he's going to go to war. He's going to take the whole family. So now what happens is there are guys that are devoted to Persico and there are guys that are devoted to Arena. And, Arena's saying, okay, if I'm taking over, you're going to be boss. You're going to be a skipper. And so blah, 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 blah. He's making all the arrangements. So on both sides, you had muscle, like crews that were really muscle. And Scarpa's crew, he was the muscle on the Persico side. He was an old school guy. He was not going to go. Persico was the boss. He's the rifle boss. I'm with him. And he was him and his whole crew were the muscle. Now, on the opposite side, the Arena's side, you had the guy named Wild Bill Catola, who was the muscle on Arena's side. So for the most part, when this war broke out, it was those two crews really going at it. So how it starts is in 91, Arena told him, no, they got to get rid of Scarpa because he's the muscle. And they tried to kill him. And it's him in a car with his daughter, his 22-year-old daughter, and his 8-month-old grandson. But they screw up the hit, and all three survive. And as a matter of fact, the story goes, I saw an interview with Greg Scarpa Jr., who just got out of prison a couple of years ago. He's like in Florida. He's like in his 70s now. And they told him when he was in prison, they tried to kill your father. And he said to the guy who told him, he goes, oh, God, now all of Brooklyn's going to burn down. And that's all that had to be done. Then Scarpa all of a sudden they legitimately went to the mattresses. I mean, you've heard it in The Godfather, you heard it in The Sopranos. So what that means is when there's a war, they have hideouts all over the city, Jersey, wherever, and you don't know where they are, and they just get, mattresses and throw them on the floor because there are soldiers in hiding waiting to come out. And every day they would just hunt each other down. And you had Scarpa, you had Larry Mazza, you had a guy named Jimmy, and you had a couple other guys that were really fucking devoted, and they would kill you at the drop of a hat. And even being HIV positive, losing I don't know how many pounds, and you see it, you could see the difference when he's before HIV positive and when he is HIV, but you see the difference in his body. He's still going around hunting, shooting people down. Even though he was that sick, he was still fucking going and killing people. And they killed the majority of the muscle on that side. I don't know if there was 6 or 7. I don't remember exactly. When you're in that life and you know that you've done wrong, you kind of have to justify it somehow, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to live with yourself. I mean, he basically said, look, it was war and it was everybody for himself, and I had to do what I had to do. But I mean, he blew a guy's head off named Nicky Black with a shotgun from foot away. Just blew his head off. He was supposed to be he was a heavyweight on the Arena side, and there were plenty of killings and so on and so forth. And at the same time, when this is happening, the feds are coming down hard. So they're fighting on all sides. The feds are coming down really hard on these guys. But every morning they would have a broken down car. They wouldn't drive anything fancy. They would have like police caps, or they would have like sunglasses. They would put coffee cups to make them look like they're police. That was like their disguise, their camouflage. He had all this surveillance, like transistor radio, to listen to the other side. He probably got from the FBI because he was working with them. And they initially won, right? Vic Arena was arrested, went to prison for life. I believe he's still alive and still in prison. But they took a beating between the feds and the guys getting killed. They took the Cumos took a really, really, really big beating. And as a matter of fact, Ali Boy got out of jail. He was appointed as boss, and he was arrested like not a year or two later again and put back in prison for life. But here's the best part. After the war is over, Scarpa is under house arrest, okay? This is a great story. His son, Greg Scarpa Jr., is in prison. He has another son, I believe named Joseph. He gets into a beef with some Lucchese gangsters that were from Brooklyn too. And he's having a problem with these guys, whatever the case may be. I don't know. He tells his father, and now his father's older, full-blown AIDS, after the war, tells his son, get in the car. And he goes over there, and he gets into a shootout with these young Lucchese guys. And one bullet hits him in the eye. Bam. Doesn't kill him. He goes home, and his wife at home, he had 3 wives, by the way. He had one in Jersey, one in Brooklyn, and he had one in Las Vegas. Okay? And the funny part is Larry Mazza was having an affair with his wife for years, for like 10 years. And he knew about it. That's another whole crazy story, right? This is why this life is this crazy story, right? So he's home, his eye is bleeding, he's drinking scotch, his wife is begging him to go to the hospital. He doesn't want to go to the hospital. He finally can't take it anymore because his eye won't stop bleeding, and he goes to the hospital. And from that day when he went to the hospital, that's when he was finally arrested and put in prison, and he died several years later in prison. But even till his last days, HIV positive, he was still fucking out there in the street in his 60s. At this point, he was a captain. He didn't have to do this, right? It was in him. That was it. That was the... So what's funny is that my father was in construction during this time. It was in the 80s, 70s into the 80s, and he became really, really good friends with Scappy, which was Greg Scarpa's boss. And Scappy and my father got along great. They loved each other. They just got along great. So because they got along great, my father was kind of able to get away with murder, like literally. He'd throw his weight around. Even though he was in construction, Scappy would use my father to go collect money. And my father wasn't physically imposing, and he wasn't really like a street fighter kind of guy, but he was very smart and conniving and like smart like a fox, right? So if somebody did get loud with him, if they didn't have the money, he would just say, "Look, you got to deal with Scappy, not me," and he would just walk out. And then he would tell Scappy, "This guy's giving me a problem." But for most part, he never had a problem.
Sounds like even though he wasn't a maiden member, they knew his friend was, and
Yeah.
people would pretty much do whatever he asked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were times where my father would run up credit in a supply house in Brooklyn, because they needed material and he wouldn't pay them. And then they deny him more credit. And then Scappy would step in there, would walk in, and then everybody would shit in their pants and they would just give him the extra line of credit he needed. But of course, then when he went to prison, then they wanted the money back, right? Obviously. But my father would like do things like he would go pick up money and then he would only give Scappy half and he would be like, I need some money. And Scappy would be like, all right. He just liked them a lot, They were making money and so on and so forth. So Scappy finally goes to prison for like 30 something years. And who takes over is Greg Scarpa. Now, Greg Scarpa knew my dad, but he wasn't really good friends with him like Scappy. Like him and Scappy they loved each other. What happens is you have books, who owes what, and, Shylock, businesses, gambling, and, you have books and you pass it to Scarpa. Scarpa he's acting boss now of that crew, right? And he sees that my father owes 40,000 and he's not like Scappy and he's not a friend of his. And he goes to my dad and I was a baby. I was very young. My brother Dominic, I think, was 20, and my brother Michael was like 23, and they were both working for my father at the time. And Reaper came to the house with the crew. Scarpa came to my father's shop, wrecked the shop, destroyed the shop, threatening my dad, threatening everybody until he got the money. So then what happened was my middle brother, who was 20, takes it upon himself to go see Teddy Persico, Carmine's brother, because they were wiring romantic limousines. My father had the job to wire romantic limousines, and who was running romantic limousines was Teddy Persico. So my brother took it upon himself and said to Teddy, talk to you. Meanwhile, he was just working, wiring, and he's like, "Yeah, Dominic, what's up?" He thought he wanted to talk about him about work, and my brother said, Mr. Scarp has been coming around, and he's like, "Shh, let's go outside. Let's go outside." And I go outside, and my brother Dominic tells him what happens, and he goes, "Okay, I'll take care of it." And inevitably, that 40,000 of debt from Scarpa became Teddy Persico's.